Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this special breaking news broadcast. We are coming to you live this morning with a monumental development out of Abuja that is sending shockwaves across the country and the international community. The Court of Appeal has officially granted bail to the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. But what was expected to be a morning of straightforward legal proceedings has quickly devolved into absolute shock and fierce national debate. What happened inside that courtroom immediately after the bail ruling was delivered is not just an ordinary legal adjustment, it is a bombshell twist of historic proportions that will undoubtedly dominate national discussion for weeks to come. We do not do surface-level reporting here. To truly understand the sheer gravity of what is unfolding this morning, we have to look back at the highly volatile, high-stakes journey that brought the Nigerian judicial system and the secessionist movement to this historic crossroad. There have been 5 major, brutal developments in this case over the past few years that systematically built up to this exact moment. These developments explain precisely why this morning's ruling, and the shocking condition attached to it, feels so incredibly significant. Stay with us as we break down the 5 critical developments that led to this explosive climax. If you are joining us right now and want to support honest, fearless journalism on this highly sensitive matter, please like this stream, share it with your network, and subscribe so you do not miss a single update as this highly fluid situation continues to develop. The first major development is the dramatic rearrest and the ensuing media storm that completely altered the political landscape of the nation. This entire saga exploded into national consciousness the day Nnamdi Kanu was rearrested in a swift, highly coordinated, and deeply controversial international operation in Kenya. This was not a standard extradition. It was an extraordinary rendition that sparked immediate legal, diplomatic, and ethical fires. The operation was ruthless, with Kanu's legal team alleging that he was subjected to days of blindfolded detention and torture before being secretly flown into Abuja to be paraded by federal authorities. The images and videos that emerged from that day showed a high-stakes security action that left his massive base of supporters deeply outraged, alienated, and fiercely angry. Within hours of the news breaking, the internet was ablaze with eyewitness accounts, unverified photos, and live reports that flooded every single social media platform. The fallout was instantaneous and devastating. Massive protests erupted across the southeast region morning after morning. Angry youths, feeling entirely disenfranchised by the federal government's actions, took to the streets in large numbers. There were severe confrontations with security agencies, leading to tragic losses of life on both sides. This singular event birthed the infamous Monday sit-at-home orders, a civil disobedience tactic that systematically shut down local economies, forced schools to close, and turned bustling commercial hubs like Onitsha and Aba into ghost towns. The federal government vehemently defended the arrest as a perfectly lawful and absolutely necessary intervention to preserve national security and prevent the disintegration of the state. But for millions of Kanu's supporters, it was viewed as a blatant abduction and a direct, calculated attack on their collective voice. This brutal opening chapter changed everything, transforming Kanu from a vocal regional activist into an undeniable national and international figure, setting the foundation for the bitter legal war that followed. The second critical development centers on the terrifying threat of maximum punishment and the deployment of the explosive 22 grounds of appeal. As the case moved from one courtroom to another over the years, the situation grew increasingly dark and dangerous for Kanu. The federal prosecution pushed forward with unrelenting force, heavily amending their charges to include severe terrorism and treasonable felony counts that carried the very real possibility of a death sentence or lifetime imprisonment. The system appeared fiercely determined to permanently extinguish his influence. This culminated in the devastating events of late 2025, when Justice James Omotosho of the Federal High Court convicted Kanu on multiple counts, handing down a staggering life sentence and ordering his transfer to a maximum security correctional facility in Sokoto State. It was a dark day for the separatist movement, and it looked as though the legal road had completely run out. But Kanu's legal team, a formidable coalition of senior advocates of Nigeria, proved they had come prepared for a grueling legal bloodbath. In early 2026, they fired back with one of the most comprehensive, aggressive, and meticulously drafted legal documents in recent Nigerian judicial history, the explosive 22 Grounds of Appeal. This document was entirely ruthless, incredibly detailed, and completely fearless. It aggressively challenged the absolute jurisdiction of the trial court, questioning how a judge could convict a man whose initial presence in the country was the result of an internationally condemned rendition. The appeal highlighted severe, documented human rights violations and pointed out glaring procedural contradictions, arguing that the trial judge convicted Kanu under the repealed Terrorism Prevention Act of 2013 rather than the updated 2022 legislation. Furthermore, his legal team fiercely argued the principle of double jeopardy, noting that he was retried on overlapping facts that an earlier Court of Appeal ruling had already declared a nullity. When this massive appellate document dropped, it landed like a seismic bomb in legal circles. Experienced lawyers, political analysts, and constitutional scholars were stunned by its depth, boldness, and sheer technical brilliance. It forced the prosecution onto the defensive, raised the judicial stakes to the highest possible level, and proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Kanu's camp was not going down without a fierce, intelligent, and unrelenting legal fight to the bitter end. The third major development focuses on the agony of prolonged detention, a severe health crisis, and the crushing weight of international pressure. While the legal heavyweights battled relentlessly on paper and in the courtroom, Nnamdi Kanu remained locked away in prolonged detention, far removed from the public eye. Weeks turned into agonizing months, and months bled into years. Soon, deeply alarming reports regarding his rapidly deteriorating physical condition began to leak out of the Department of State Services custody and, later, the Sokoto Correctional Center. Family members, lead counsels, and close associates continuously sounded the alarm, claiming that Kanu was suffering from a severe, life-threatening heart condition and was being intentionally and maliciously denied access to proper, independent medical care. The crisis escalated further with a highly publicized controversy involving his personal physician, Emeritus Professor Martin Agaji. Reports emerged alleging that security agents intercepted and detained the medical icon in an attempt to suppress independent medical evaluations regarding Kanu's advanced cardiac health. This phase of the saga was emotionally devastating for his followers, who felt entirely helpless watching their leader languish from afar. Consequently, the prolonged detention without adequate medical intervention became one of the biggest and most volatile talking points across the country. The narrative successfully shifted. This was no longer strictly a domestic legal dispute, but a full-blown international humanitarian crisis. Local and global human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, got heavily involved, issuing scathing reports demanding his immediate access to specialized medical facilities. Prominent foreign governments, international parliaments, including vocal members of the United Kingdom Parliament, given Kanu's dual British citizenship and various United Nations special rapporteurs issued incredibly strong, unavoidable statements calling for fairness, the rule of law, and basic humanitarian consideration. International media networks picked up the story, amplifying the crisis globally and beaming the failures of the Nigerian judicial system to millions of screens worldwide. This relentless, multi-directional pressure mounted heavily on the Nigerian authorities, exposing deep cracks in the system and forcing political stakeholders to seriously reevaluate the optics and the long-term sustainability of keeping him locked up indefinitely under such horrific conditions. The fourth key development reveals the intense political divisions, the secret backdoor meetings, and the dangerously rising tensions within the country. Away from the flashing cameras and the loud courtroom rhetoric, the politics strictly surrounding this case became incredibly messy, highly complicated, and heavily factionalized. Credible leaks from ASO-Rock and military intelligence circles revealed that there were intense, closed-door meetings happening at the absolute highest levels of the federal executive arm. A massive, undeniable divide opened up within the government and the national security apparatus. On one side were the hardliners, powerful political figures, defense chiefs, and intelligence directors who advocated for an uncompromising, iron-fisted approach. They firmly believed that any leniency shown to Kanu would be interpreted as a sign of absolute weakness and would embolden other separatist movements across the deeply fractured nation. On the other side were the pragmatists, seasoned politicians, economic advisors, and diplomats who were quietly, yet forcefully, pushing for a political soft landing. They recognized the glaring reality on the ground. The economic impact of the continuous agitation and the Monday sit-at-home orders was completely paralyzing the Southeast. Billions of naira were being lost weekly. Foreign direct investment in the region had completely dried up, and youth restiveness was metastasizing into a dangerous, uncontrollable security crisis featuring unknown gunmen and localized warlords who had hijacked the original movement. Simultaneously, Southeast governors, traditional rulers, the Ohanese and Digbo leadership, and respected elder statesmen were engaging in frantic, quiet diplomacy. They shuttled between the capital and their home states, desperately lobbying for a political solution to a problem that courts alone clearly could not solve. This extraordinary political pressure created a highly volatile, completely unpredictable environment. It showed clearly that the Nnamdi Kanu matter had entirely transcended the boundaries of criminal law and had become deeply, inextricably intertwined with national stability, economic survival, and the fragile future of Nigerian unity. This unseen political warfare set the perfect chaotic stage for the judiciary to finally step in this morning and attempt to decisively cut the Gordian knot. This brings us directly to the fifth and most critical development, the main event that is currently unfolding. This morning's Court of Appeal bail ruling and the unprecedented, shocking twist that just occurred in court. After meticulously reviewing the exhaustive arguments presented in the 22 grounds of appeal, the appellate court convened early this morning under incredibly tight security. The streets of Abuja surrounding the court premises were heavily militarized, with armored personnel carriers and heavily armed operatives cordoning off all access roads. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the three-man panel of appellate judges began to read their highly anticipated judgment. For over 2 hours, the lead judge painstakingly deconstructed the lower court's ruling, eventually finding merit in the defense's arguments regarding procedural overreach and the violation of fundamental rights regarding his health. And then came the historic pronouncement. The Court of Appeal officially granted bail to Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. The sheer magnitude of this decision cannot be overstated. After the violent arrests, the terrifying threats of a death sentence, the grueling life sentence handed down last year, and the long, agonizing years of detention, the appellate court ruled that he is legally entitled to regain his freedom pending the final determination of any subsequent appeals. As the words left the judge's mouth, the immediate reaction was explosive. Supporters who had gathered outside the heavily fortified court premises, many dressed in traditional Igbo attire and carrying symbolic items, instantly erupted into wild, unrestrained celebrations. Tears of joy were shed, prayers of thanksgiving were shouted into the morning air. For a brief, fleeting moment, it appeared that a historic breakthrough had finally been achieved, offering clear evidence that the rule of law could still prevail in the face of overwhelming state power. But then, the entire narrative was violently flipped on its head. Just as the legal teams were organizing their papers and the initial wave of euphoric celebration was kicking off, the lead judge forcefully struck his gavel, raising a hand to demand absolute, pin-drop silence in the courtroom. He announced that the granting of the bail was not absolute. The court ruled that Kanu's release is completely and entirely contingent upon a virtually impossible, highly orchestrated caveat. Before Nnamdi Kanu is allowed to take a single step outside the custody of the state, he must fulfill a strict, non-negotiable mandate that effectively forces him to dismantle his life's work. The judge read the conditions clearly into the record. Nnamdi Kanu must sign a legally binding, irrevocable affidavit officially and permanently dissolving the indigenous people of Biafra. Furthermore, he must publicly and unequivocally renounce the Biafran secessionist movement forever. And if that was not enough, he is legally compelled to deliver this comprehensive renunciation via a pre-recorded, globally televised broadcast that will be aired on all national networks and major international news platforms before the prison doors are unlocked. The atmosphere in the courtroom instantly shifted from euphoric relief to absolute, paralyzing shock. The room descended into stunned silence, rapidly followed by chaotic murmurs and frantic consultations among the legal teams. Nnamdi Kanu's lead counsels looked visibly astounded by the sheer audacity of the condition. If Kanu agrees to sign this document and record this broadcast, he walks free this very morning. He gets to return to his family, seek the urgent, specialized medical attention his heart so desperately needs, and escape the crushing confines of his cell. But if he refuses, if he stands on his deeply held ideological principles, the bail is instantly, automatically revoked, and he returns to the maximum security facility indefinitely, left to rot while the slow wheels of the Supreme Court take years to turn. This is not just a standard legal condition, it is a meticulously crafted, ultimate political trap. By attaching this specific condition, the state has brilliantly and ruthlessly shifted the entire burden of his continued detention onto Kanu's own shoulders. It forces a man who has styled himself as the supreme leader and savior of his people to make an agonizing, impossible choice between his personal liberty and the very ideological foundation of the movement he built. If he accepts the condition, he essentially commits political suicide, demoralizing millions of hardcore supporters who have sacrificed their livelihoods, and in some tragic cases, their lives, for the struggle. He would instantly go from being a revered, almost mythical freedom fighter to a man who capitulated to the state to save his own skin. The IPOB movement would be fractured beyond repair, completely decapitated by the very man who gave it life. However, if he rejects the condition, he essentially chooses potential martyrdom in a prison cell, sacrificing his failing health and his freedom for the purity of the cause. This surprise twist has completely hijacked the narrative, transforming what should have been a standard appellate bail release into a high-stakes psychological standoff that belongs in a political thriller. The implications of this morning's twist are absolutely staggering, and the nation is collectively holding its breath. The coming hours and days will be the most decisive in the modern history of Nigerian politics and the Southeast struggle for self-determination. What exactly will Nnamdi Kanu do? Will the sheer exhaustion of years in solitary confinement, combined with his severely deteriorating health, push him to sign the document and secure his physical survival? Or will his unwavering commitment to the Biafran ideology compel him to reject the court's ultimatum, thereby sealing his fate behind bars for the foreseeable future? Furthermore, what specific, emergency legal maneuvers can his defense team possibly deploy now? Can they immediately file a stay of execution on the bail conditions at the Supreme Court, arguing that tying a man's freedom to the forced denunciation of his political beliefs is a fundamental violation of his constitutional right to freedom of thought and expression?